driven back, they rally on Cemetery Hill, which is where the National Cemetery currently stands. But Culp's Hill is right off Cemetery Hill. And it was imperative the Union Army also occupy Cemetery Hill. There was a colonel, Ira Grover, from Indiana, the 7th Indiana Infantry, and these fellas were actually in Emmitsburg, about 11 miles away. And their assignment that day was to guard the wagons. That was it, you know. So they were at Emmitsburg, and they heard the battle action miles away at Gettysburg, and they're just sitting there looking at wagons, guarding wagons. And the colonel of that regiment said, you know what, we need to go to where the battle is. So he disobeyed his instructions, marched his men all the way from Emmitsburg to here, about 11, 12 miles, got to the top of Culp's Hill just in time to throw back a Confederate probe that was on its way up the hillside. So in that instance, disobeying orders paid off.
Well, they can stay, they're fine. Okay. You know,
yeah, but this part of the field, unfortunately, is not as visited as Little Round Top, Devil's Den, but still it's an important part of the story to tell. And as we go up the hill, we're going to see a good number of monuments. Part of the tragedy, of course, of the Civil War is that it sometimes hit family against family. And the state of Maryland, especially, was a state divided. And there were units who fought with the Union and the Confederate. And as it turned out, here at Culp's Hill, part of the Confederate force that attacked here on the night of July 2nd was the 2nd Maryland Infantry. They were fighting against the 1st Maryland Union.
So the guys up on the hill, the Indiana was coming through the 27th.
That's right, yep. So you can see
they had them right down.
Absolutely right. Yeah, you can see it was
chilling.
And you can just picture the Confederates lined up behind those rock walls and boulders.
Behind the boulders.
The gallant attack made across. And they tried, you know, it was...
Did Van Buskirk fall here?
No, he made it through. He made it through, and actually his wife gave birth to a baby girl in September of 1864 that they named Gettysburg. Gettysburg Van Buskirk was the name of that girl.
So he survived the war.
He did. He did. Not for long, though. Unfortunately, I believe he passed away in 1872. He would have been in his early 40s. And it could have been the exposure, the elements of the war. So many of these soldiers are, not living long lives afterward, because camping out there and all the weather elements.
So do states usually are like in charge of putting up monuments for the infantry?
Actually, most of the monuments you see were placed here by the veterans themselves.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
they were placed here by the units, and the states contributed money. For example, I believe this is the 29th Pennsylvania. So the veterans would have pooled their resources and probably pitched in a few $100, but the state of Pennsylvania would have contributed 1,000 more for a monument to be placed to that unit. There's a moratorium on new monuments on the battlefield today. So there were some recent monuments as of 1998 and I believe 2001, but that was the last time a monument was placed on the battlefield. Most of the monuments are also part of the history too, because the veterans designed them, and they wrote the text that goes along with it. So, and I do have to mention many of the leaders of these units would go on to political careers after the war. Another famous Indianan is Benjamin Harrison, colonel of the 70th Indiana. But here,
President.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Joshua Chamberlain, 20th Maine, became governor of Maine in the years after the war. William Oates, commander of the 15th Alabama, became governor of Alabama. Lucius Fairchild, the 2nd Wisconsin, became governor of Wisconsin. And we're soon going to pass a monument to John Geary, who became governor of Pennsylvania after the war as well. So it amazes me that even after getting through this battle, they were determined to keep serving their country in some capacity. And just off here to your front is the statue of John Geary. He will serve with distinction as a general in the Civil War and also as a governor of Pennsylvania after the war. So, yeah, there's a lot of people here whose most prominent story had yet to be told.
And the Texas, you said we're going to go by the Texas.
Well, they're actually on the far other end of the field, I'm afraid to say. They have a small pink granite memorial placed in the 1960s. Yeah, but that's the first, fourth, and fifth Texas. I used to work at Antietam in Western Maryland, Antietam Battlefield.
Been there.
And there, the 27th Indiana, that was the unit that found these plans, Special Orders 191.
Oh,
yeah, so it was
in the
soldiers.
satchel?
Yep. That was.
What an incredible
Yep,
story.
yep. They got tired from marching from Washington to Frederick, Maryland, and they went into camp south of Frederick, and there's a satchel in the grass, and they found Lee's orders.
So
So
that history.
27th Indiana. Yeah.
He said that Indiana 27.
Yep. They were the ones that
Unit
found
that
Lee's orders.
literally found a satchel
Yep.
with all of Lee's battle plans.
Yep. So that helped.
On the research battle plans that were wrapped.
That was them.
cigars.
That was them. That was
That
yep,
was
that
in
was
the
those
briefcase.
orders. Yep, Special Orders number 191. That was the orders that the Indians found. They also found them wrapped around 3 cigars.
Pushers.
Yeah. So the cigars for the soldiers were the big find, and I think the sad part about it was the soldier who found it, John Bloss was his name. He wow, cigars, great, but then he read it and he's like, I ought to pass this along. So it got elevated up the chain of command, and for whatever reason, he sent the cigars with it. So he never got to enjoy his discovery, if you will. But at Antietam, the 27th Indiana was in the cornfield, as were the Texas soldiers. And unfortunately, the 1st Texas Infantry at Antietam suffered 82% casualties. This is a Union general by the name of Henry Slocum. He is the commander of the 12th Army Corps. The Army of the Potomac, the Union Army here, is divided into 7 infantry corps, and each of the corps had a major general commanding it. Henry Slocum was a West Pointer from, I believe, Syracuse, New York. What strikes me is the age of these guys, because Slocum was 35, Oliver Howard's 33, Jim Stewart's 31. I mean, this is a war fought by kids, led by young men. I mean, literally young men. To be, I just turned 38. The Union Army commander at Antietam was younger than I am now, and I couldn't imagine that responsibility of 80,000 lives, commanding that on the field. So it strikes me as bizarre that these generals are 35, 33. And behind you is Cemetery Hill. We're looking at the reverse slope of Cemetery Hill. And you'll see statues up there to Winfield Scott Hancock, commander of the 2nd Corps.
And is this the town cemetery?
This is the town cemetery, yes, sir. This is the Evergreen.
Is this where Lincoln did the speech?
Yep, Lincoln stood very near the top, and I'll do my best to point it out. Now, Winfield Scott Hancock, the commander of the 2nd Corps here, he ran against James Garfield for the presidency in 1880. So he also, and it was a close election too, so he almost prevailed. And, maybe Charles Dutel never got that.
So up on the top of the hill?
Up on top of this hill, as we travel past. Now, of course, at the time, there were far fewer graves.
Can you stop? Can we get out?
Well, that's entirely up to you.
So I want to stop.
Hey guys, you want to stop?
Governor. No, I want to stop. I want to see where Lincoln gave the speech.
It is probably going to be about 150-yard walk.
I've done that before.
Okay. I just good.
Yeah, a lot of people think he gave the speech in the National Cemetery. But he actually gave it
Over here.
because the National Cemetery, John told us, was completely active when he was here.
It's fascinating. It'll be great to see it, yeah.
Where'd John go?
It's right here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm holding up the words here. I mean, the National Cemetery here is the final resting place for 6,600
of course, it is best remembered for the Liberty War Fund. It is, yes, sir. Town cemetery is over here. Right adjacent to it. And there are close to 3,600 Civil War dead here. Good. And 3,000 more Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. It was deemed to be full in the 1970s.
So are we going to be able to get over there?
We're going to get to the fence. Yeah. The fence that now separates the two was not here until the 1930s.
The flag doesn't mark the spot, does it?
It does not. That is the final resting place of Jenny Wade. She was an 18-year-old girl who unfortunately was struck down and killed by a stray bullet while she was baking bread for her recently born nephew.
So how many Americans are interred here?
In total, it's 6,600. Civil War dead, 3,600.
These are Civil War markers.
They are. And in fact, if we could just veer off a little bit to the left, we'll head up toward the fence.
There's a gate right there.
There is. I think it is locked. I'm sorry to say. But as we stand here,
Go over here. Where?
we are not 100% sure. Some historians tell you the platform was right where this grave to the Yount family is,
Here?
right here, and others who maintain it was where that mausoleum is, on top of that highest point. But either way, it was not behind you. That's marked by the monument, and that little marker there is the Kentucky Memorial. So we have to imagine that this fence, by the way, used to stand around Lafayette Park. It was brought up here in the 1930s. The platform where Lincoln stood was somewhere here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There were
And it
far
was
fewer.
an enormous crowd.
It was close to 20,000. Yep, and 20,000 people who were enraptured by Edward Everett.
Right.
Edward Everett spoke for 2 hours straight from memory. You know, he talked all about
Did Lincoln speak before or
after. Yep. So the big problem was getting the crowd to quiet down because after Everett spoke, there was a tremendous ovation. It was so loud, and it was the applause kept going and going until finally a choir began to sing a little bit, and Lincoln stood. He stood in place. You know, Everett was very dramatic. He was very eloquent. Lincoln stood looking down. You know, he had two pieces of paper.
Yeah, I've seen the picture.
Yeah, that was it. Mm-hmm. And it was over so fast. Now, when he was invited to talk here, he was told to just deliver a few appropriate remarks, and he took that to heart. You know, just a few appropriate remarks, and he was done so fast that the crowd didn't even know he was finished. You know, they kind of looked at each other like, "Well, is that it? You know, is that all he's got?" So Lincoln apparently sat down and he turned to Everett and he said, "That won't scour." You know, he thought it was a flop, but eventually, of course, it became the American speech.
One of the most important speeches
Absolutely.
in the history of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and as relevant and meaningful today as it was then. Mm-hmm.
Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Nobody really knows the very good.
Oh, absolutely.
David.
I could actually
Down.
walk this. My son's nice to meet you. Thank you. Can't keep up real quick, all right?
Are they unmarked or are they marked somewhere else?
The graves that we're looking upon right here are half of the 939 completely unknown remains.
These are unknown remains.
That's right. Yep. So
That's what I thought.
the gentleman who was essentially in charge of reburying the Union dead here, he did his best to identify them by name. If not by name, he tried to get their state, so they would be buried in their state plot. But for these fellas, all he knew is they were wearing blue. That's it. So there are 939 completely unknown burials.
Numbers on them, I thought maybe it was
So the numbers, we thought it might have just been necessary. Did in the course of time and just keep the record, but they didn't know who they were.
Yeah, there were no dog tags or any kind of identification that the soldiers could.
As a student of history, I just love to see where things
Yeah. And, you know, the thought was when Lincoln finished his speech, there really wasn't a thought to mark the precise place. It's only been in the past, you know, several decades where that has become one of the most frequently asked questions. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
You're laughing at
So we can go this way.
This way. Good.
You're right. Very good. And I thought what we would do is make our way just to the other side of the tour road here and do through the introduction.
Watch this hole.
Governor Pence, welcome to Gettysburg National Military Park.
Thank you.
I thought what I'd do today is provide just a brief overview of the battle and campaign with a focus in on Indiana's contributions to the battle. Of course, Indiana, a prominent state during the Civil War. Governor Oliver Morton was a very strong supporter of Abraham Lincoln. Carried the state with 51% in 1860, and Lincoln did, and 54% in 1864. So Indiana contributed about 200,000 soldiers to the war effort. Only about 2,200 served here. There were 5 regiments of Indiana infantry, 2 of cavalry, and 550 of those became casualties during the 3-day battle here at Gettysburg. So
550.
550. Yep. So about 1 out of every 4 Indiana soldiers shed blood upon these fields. Now, Gettysburg, of course, is best remembered as the bloodiest battle of America's bloodiest war. 3 days of combat, 51,000 casualties. And in actuality, it was about 30 hours of combat. You know, they didn't fight at night. Gettysburg was also the battle that ended the Second Confederate invasion of the Union. Robert E. Lee will commence his retreat from Gettysburg on July 4th. Confederate Army will turn its back on Gettysburg and on Pennsylvania. Never again will it make its way this far north. So that is how we best remember Gettysburg. Unfortunately, it has that dubious distinction of the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. But in a larger sense, to quote Abraham Lincoln, what happened upon these fields, you know, helped to ensure America's new birth of freedom. And it helped to ensure that this government of and by and for the people will not perish from the earth. So Robert E. Lee is the Confederate Army commander. He embarked upon a campaign of invasion here in Pennsylvania in June of 1863. He got a good head start on his opponent, the Union Army. Now Lee, of course, had been victorious in Virginia, but his victories in Virginia have not yet had the impact he was hoping for. And he was thinking that a victory in Pennsylvania would have far more lasting consequences. Wear down the northern willingness to fight this war, you know, perhaps put pressure on the people up north to not re-elect Abraham Lincoln in 1864. So Lincoln was not only a military commander, but he's also thinking politically, thinking diplomatically, maybe perhaps England, France might support the Confederate States of America. And the reason why a battle came about here at the town of Gettysburg, it was completely unplanned. Neither army commander planned for this battle to take place here, but Lee's army had crossed into Pennsylvania well off to the west and north of us. And when Robert E. Lee found out the Union Army was closing in fast, he tried to concentrate his army back together.
So Lee's army is divided across Pennsylvania: Chambersburg, Shippensburg, Carlisle, Harrisburg, York. And what made Gettysburg appealing, behind you by about 3/4 of a mile, there are 10 different roads leading into this town. So it was the ideal spot for a divided army to gather. So he gave the orders for all of his commanders: make your way toward Gettysburg, but do not bring on a battle if you should happen to see the Union Army. Well, the Union Army got here first, and deployed across this ridge line right in front of you was the advanced element of the Union Army, John Buford's cavalry, and within that cavalry division is the 3rd Indiana Cavalry. So it was soldiers from Indiana who helped to fire some of the first shots. The advance of the Confederate Army is coming down this road to Chambersburg Pike, and despite Lee's instructions not to bring on a battle, when they saw the Union cavalry, they opened fire. So one thing led to the next, and an unplanned, unprepared battle developed. Things got out of hand as more Confederates began to arrive from the west and from the north on a very hot July morning in 1863. Of course, before this was a battlefield, this was someone's backyard. This was the home of Edward McPherson, congressman at the time. So he was living in Washington, renting out his property to a young farm family, and they will watch in horror as their property is taken over for this battle. So it seemed as though the Confederate Army is going to brush back the advance of the Union Army and drive away the Union cavalry, but that's when the 1st Union Infantry arrived on the field. That's the Union 1st Corps, commanded by John Reynolds. There's an equestrian statue of Reynolds up here. He had 10,000 soldiers, and they will arrive just in the nick of time to push back that initial Confederate advance toward town. Now, with Reynolds in the 1st Army Corps is one of the hardest fighting units in the Union Army, the Iron Brigade. That's Wisconsin, Michigan, and Indiana. The 19th Indiana Infantry, which will be fed into the fight just to our south. They will enter the woodlot here, and in the process drive back some hard parts in Alabama and Tennessee. Now, the 19th Indiana will enjoy some initial success that day, but when another division of Confederate infantry arrived, the 19th Indiana is going to suffer close to 70%. Among those who fall that day was a sergeant, a 19-year-old sergeant by the name of Asa Blankard. Asa Blankard was falling back, watching his Indians get shot down one after the next. He grabbed the flag when it fell to the ground, wrapped his body around it, was shot through the hip, and bled out on the ground after the of the United States. So Asa Blankard became a hero within the 19th Infantry. The 19th Indiana, the 24th Michigan, and all those Wisconsin units of the Iron Brigade will be pushed back to the fallback zone to the Seminary Ridge. This behind is about a half-mile away. And the end of the battle on the first day will resolve the Confederate. Robert E. Lee's men have prevailed. They survived the Union soldiers completely out of the area. High ground south of town, Cemetery Hill. So the next 2 days of battle are going to be fought south of town as Robert E. Lee would try to deliver that knockout punch. He came more soon. So I know it's a really brief overview, a really brief introduction, but okay, very good. Hopefully that all kind of made sense to you. And as we go throughout the rest of the tour,
the 19th Indiana came down.
they did. In fact, if you see where that bus is parked, just behind there to the left, the 19th Indiana will advance into the fight just on the south side of this woodlot. And as they emerged into the tree lot, that's where they collided head-on with the Confederate infantry. A little bit later on in the day, as they attempted to hold that position, that's when North Carolinians are going to overwhelm, drive them back, and as I said, 70% casualties within that one unit. They went into the fight with 339 men. They are going to lose about 250. Just in that one unit. That was one of 5 Indiana units to be present on the field.
We remember the 19th.
Yeah, absolutely.
We did.
And as we go, I'll talk about the actions of the 27th, the 14th, the 7th, and other Indiana soldiers here. So even though they were but small in number, they certainly had a impact on the fight.
Wow. Okay, where are we headed now?
All right, guys.
We're going to head through the battlefield along Seminary Ridge to the other side of the field. We'll hop off again at the Indian Stadium.
All right, to the man, guys. Cool. Thank you. Cool. Bring this way.
He was. Buford was first on the scene. He's West Point class of 54.
And as Buford and his 3,000 men are galloping toward Gettysburg, he was the first to recognize the valuable ground. Here, or we could stay here on the pavement. It's up to you. But as we look off,
Step here a little way.
yeah.
So the 27th one
Here, they would have begun the day in that woodlot, and this was Friday morning, July 3rd, and you might see the top of a smaller monument right above this drum. That's the 27th Indiana Memorial, specifically to that regiment,
right there.
right there. And it stands atop a rock that would have provided shelter to the wounded men of this regiment. So the ground that we're standing upon literally was swept across right by these soldiers of the 27th. They're attacking in this direction here, and behind these boulders and the rock walls that you see in the distance, there's a brigade of Virginia soldiers. And essentially the men from Indiana were told to drive out those soldiers. They made a determined and gallant effort, sweeping right across this ground. And within the ranks of the 27th Indiana was the tallest known soldier in the Union Army. His name is David Van Buskirk. He's from Monroe County. At a time when the average soldier is 5'6", he was 6'11", and he weighed close to 400 pounds. And he was actually captured the year before outside of Richmond and confined to Libby Prison in Richmond. The Confederate President Jeff Davis heard that Van Buskirk was there, so he went down to talk with him. He asked him, he said, "I have to ask you, Captain, are all your brothers as big as you?" And Van Buskirk looked at the President of the Confederacy and said, "Not my brothers, but each of my sisters had to bend over to kiss me goodbye when I left home." So he had a well-rehearsed answer for that question. And as Van Buskirk, this bear of a man, is charging across these fields, a Virginia captain yelled out, "Boys, if we can't hit him, we don't deserve to win this war." But unfortunately, the 27th Indiana will make it to this point here. You can see there's a small marker on this open field.
Right here.
That's right. Before the fire coming from the Virginians was just too heavy, too hot, and the Indiana soldiers fell back. Charging next to them is the 2nd Massachusetts. The commander of that unit was a student at Harvard when the war broke out. He is among the fallen here as well. So these two units are given this assignment, this almost impossible assignment, to drive the Confederate soldiers from behind the rocks and walls, and they suffered heavy casualties as a result, nearly 40% casualties. So as we can see, Indiana soldiers are represented.
And how many were in the 27th?
The 27th, I have that here, and forgive me for consulting my notes. There are a total of 339 men in that unit. There's 111 casualties, so 33%. 4 color bearers are killed carrying the flag of the United States across this field from that tree line to that point there. So the color bearers, of course,
And that's
became
where
the
they turned them
targets.
back.
That's right. So Indiana was present on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd day, and they have a prominent role to be told at Gettysburg.
Yeah. Beautiful. Where are we headed next?
I think the plan is I'm going to be riding back with Maria from here.
Okay.
As,
You can ride with us.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, ride with us.
I'll leave that to you. Okay.
I just want to go see this.
Absolutely.
Come on, sure. farthest point gained by the regiment in its charge. 3 July 1863. Marks at the base of the hill behind the town in Fort Connor. 4 color bearers were killed as the people carrying flags. Something. That's Indiana limestone. That's fitting. Okay. Okay, John, you ride with us.
Hey, is there more towards there's more towards that?
Hey, Mark, follow. I got more questions. All right,
There's somebody that knows where it is.
I get the lead car.
there's a park on the left.